All right. Hello, everyone. It's November the 16th. Welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today, I'm recording a video for the new moon in Scorpio coming up, which will also be a Mercury Cazimi, and it will be opposing the planet Uranus. It's also in this grand water trine position where you've got Jupiter in Cancer exalted, and you've got Saturn, Neptune, and Pisces. So you've got a lot of water going on. You've got Uranus and Taurus. Um, there's something about all this. Of course, in my channel, I take a number of different approaches. Sometimes I talk about politics and current events, and there have been a lot of interesting developments going on in politics, but today I'm going to be focusing more on approaching this from the level of folk music, poetry, song, myth and legend, that kind of thing. And recently, I was mentioning this album, Solomon's Seal by the Pentangle. This is a British 1960s, 1970s folk rock group. Um, and I brought them up in my last video, but I didn't. I figured for this video to illustrate part of what's going on with the astrology, I'd get into a very specific song. The thing about this, I have to admit, is that with a lot of water going on, there is a certain element here of me trying listening to folk music and it being like emotional or like a tearjerker. And there's something about the problem, well, of what you would call negative emotions or ruminating or and how that relates to, let's say, the New Age scene, the Western spiritualism, Western esotericism. Oftentimes, there's a lot of emphasis on trying to like free yourself from the grip of fear and worry and low vibration and negative emotions and all this kind of stuff. And yet, in this we got a new moon, right? To what do the astrologers usually say? Like, oh, time to renew your intentions, or all this kind of, or like let go of what doesn't serve you, all this kind of thing. And there's this idea of a new moon in Scorpio, where Scorpio, for one thing, is the place where the moon does not have very good dignity. The moon is in fall in Scorpio, and the moon exalts in Taurus. And so right off the bat, when I look at astrology, I'm just going to give it to you straight. I am not overly fond of this one because if we're talking about the moon is not in very good condition. Also, the moon is co-present with Venus, which is in detriment. I am a Venus and Scorpio native. I know all about it, but nonetheless, I just had my Venus return with this transit, and it leaves me in a state where I might feel, you know, emotionally frustrated or tumultuous or moody or that kind of thing, right? Now, the thing about all this is you also have to think about some of these aspects that are happening. Saturn and Neptune were in Aries, a fire sign, a young fire sign, and now they've retrograded into the water sign. And Uranus was in Gemini, and air is also yang, and this Uranus is retrograded into the feminine earth sign of Taurus, right? And so there's this kind of, we have a lot of yin in this chart. We do have Mars, the ruler of Scorpio, traditional ruler of Scorpio, in Sagittarius, a fire sign, but there's predominantly a lot of earth and water and yin energy. And with that in mind, I thought that there's a certain song on the Pentangle album, the tale, or it's just called Willy of Winsbury. And it's a song, I've got the original lyric sheets here. It's a song that introduces us to a set of characters. We have the king. The king has been a prisoner, and a prisoner long in Spain, and Willy of the Winsbury has lain long with the daughter at home. So we've got the king, his daughter, the king is imprisoned, and some guy, Willy o' Winsbury, has been laying with his daughter. And the first few verses of the song then following that, has the king asking his daughter what ails her. What ails you? What ails you, my daughter Janet? Why do you look so pale and wan? Well, have you had any sore sickness, or have you been sleeping with a man? And all this kind of stuff. And so basically, the king can tell that there's something off about his daughter. There's some kind of problem with his daughter, and that he's sort of interrogating her. And it's also kind of strange because eventually he gets his daughter to take off her clothes, and he's like inspecting her. So it's kind of, this is kind of maybe it goes with the Venus in Scorpio and the sort of discomfort of Venus and the moon in Scorpio and the over sexual, like, I mean, Scorpio rules the genitals. Okay, so there is that dynamic to the whole problem. But as we keep going with this, eventually the king asks, was it with a lord or a duke or a knight or a man of birth and fame, or was it with one of my serving men that has lately come out of Spain? No, it wasn't with a lord or a duke or a knight, nor with a man of fame. It was with Willy of Winsbury, and I could bide no longer alone. And the king, so then the king, he is called on his merry men all by 30 and by 3, says, fetch me this Willy of Winsbury, for hanged he shall be. But when he came, the king before, he was clad all in the red silk. His hair was like the strands of gold, his skin was white as the milk. And it is no wonder, said the king, that my daughter's love you did win. For if I was a woman as I am a man, my bedfellow you would have been. So here, there's this kind of interesting thing that happens where the king does this flip-flop. And there's just something about this which is like, if you think about the principles of yin and yang as being like, in this basic duality between accepting and rejecting, or giving a yes or giving a no, there is like the king senses that his daughter's upset, goes through this process of interrogating her and drawing out the truth. And then then once he's got it, he flip-flops between, first of all, we're going to find this guy, we're going to hang him, he's going to be punished, I'm going to protect, be a protective figure, defend against this thing that's making my daughter. But then when he actually gets a chance to meet a guy, he flip-flops to a kind of extreme positivity about it, being all like, well, he looks pretty handsome, you know, maybe if I was in a different position myself, I could relate, maybe I'd get with this guy, right? So there's kind of like this weird lopsided thing where you're like, you flip between persecuting the guy and like hanging him, and then like, oh, I'd like this guy for my own lover or something. Like it's kind of the polarities are not really balanced, I guess you could say. And then he says, it goes on, he says, will you marry my daughter Janet by the truth of your right hand? Oh, will you marry my daughter Janet? I'll make you the lord of my land. Oh, yes, I will marry your daughter Janet by the truth of my right hand. Oh, yes, I will marry your daughter Janet, but I'll not be the lord of your land. And he's mounted her on a milk-white steed, and himself on a dapple gray. He has made her the lady of as much land as she shall ride on a long summer's day. And this is basically, I was listening to the song, and I was like, at first, basically, when I was first listening to this, I was absorbed into the sound of the singer's voice and the sound of the music, to the point where I was not really paying that much attention on the words or the story or trying to like decipher or decode it. I was just taking it all in as an aesthetic experience, basically, right? And then when I got to the sort of the end of the song, it was like, you kind of like bought into this whole like kind of like sweet, nice sounding folktale, and then it was like the plot was just like clinking into place, and you're like, oh no, what's happening, right? And it's like, and then all of a sudden it's like, there's something about it where it's like the thing about this is a traditional story, coming of age story about the king, his daughter, and her groom, and marriage, coming of age, and basically letting go of a certain chapter of your life to another one. But there's something about this where there's something about the archetype of the yin and the yang where especially with water and emotions, there's some kind of like emotions and water, and especially when we talk about like negative emotions, obviously I take a there's a guy that I read, a local Vancouver guy named Gabor Mate, who had a good line about this. He said, let's not be negative about negativity. Okay? So there's something about this where I have a certain friction, a certain conflict with the New Age, with Western esotericism, when it becomes too much like positive thinking, positive vibes only, all this kind of stuff. And I think this is a certain example of it illustrated in a folk tale, because you can imagine that before the story plays out, you've got the king kind of noticing his daughter in a state of rumination, in a state of worry, in a state of negative emotion, and the king wants to find out what the problem is. Why are you so fussed? And we can just solve this in an easy way. If is it romance? Is it a groom? If this guy is a suitable, like, basically, it's not, you don't have to fret and worry about this. If the guy is a suitable groom, you marry your daughter off. If he's not, you hang him. Easy. You don't have to think about it, right? And so there's this kind of like masculine way where we're not going to waste time and energy ruminating over emotional problems. We're going to it's either going to be all good or all bad, and then we're going to make the decision, and then we're not going to think about it, and then we're going to conserve that energy for productive masculine things, right? And the problem about this is that there's some sort of like, in the attempt to simplify things so that it's either all good or all bad, so it's just an easy decision. Like, if it was an easy decision, maybe she wouldn't be worrying about it. Maybe she wouldn't be ruminating about it, right? And there's a sort of like, if you've ever been in a bad mood, or if you've ever been the stuff you have to take responsibility for your life, the choices that you make, the things you do with your life, and that there's something about it's not always just a simple, like, I've heard this kind of thing, like different self-care strategies for if you're stressed out about something. Some people say, if you're stressed out about something, sometimes the best way to be unstressed is to just simply make a decision, and then just say like, oh, well, I don't have to ruminate about this anymore. I've made a decision, and now I can just go, I don't have to worry, right? And so there's something about this where I think the king is just like, stop ruminating. Let's make a decision. So we can get this uncomfortable negative emotion out of here, and we can just, everybody gets to live happily ever after, right? There's something about this, which I also have to admit, here at Dan's Astrology, I may not just put out directly all of my, let's say enemies or things that I am opposed to, but and maybe perhaps it's best to be, ambiguous or subtle about not naming all the things I'm against or all the things that I'm opposed to, but I'm going to be clear with you about one of these characters, that one of the sworn enemies of Dan's Astrology, a YouTube channel, is the popular life coach guru Tony Robbins. Now, recently, within the last year, I suppose, I have been cleaning up my parents' house here, and one of the things that I found was, I was shocked, basically, to find that my parents had stashed away a whole box set of Tony Robbins self-help tapes, and out of some kind of morbid curiosity, I began listening to them. Now, the problem about this is that as much as I hate, I don't want to even use the word hate, because hate is kind of a strong word, but I don't like Tony Robbins. I don't agree with him, but there's something about trying to listen to I just started listening to one of his tapes, and it was like, there's something subtle about it that, like, you're like, wait, what if he does have a point? What if I'm so quick to dismiss him, but what if he does have a point? And I decided it would be better just to like give all of the tapes away to the Goodwill and not investigate any further. But the one that I did listen to, Tony Robbins was talking about how the things that we don't actually want the things that we want in life. We just want to feel good. basically, right? He's saying that if you are a person who has different goals and dreams and ambitions in life, and that you're frustrated because you haven't reached those goals and dreams and ambitions yet, the Tony Robbins, what do you, in this tape that, and this is, mind you, this is a cassette tape, so this is probably, obviously, I don't know, the 90s or 80s, like before CDs or other kinds of media took over, like the old cassette tapes. So this was from like Tony Robbins back in the 80s. But Tony Robbins was basically saying that in order to motivate, because he's basically got his name as a motivational speaker, in order to motivate yourself to achieve your goals and achieve your dreams, like the thing is, he's saying that what you're not doing it because at some level you know the thing that you are trying to achieve you don't really want, because you don't really want that thing. You just want to feel good, right? So what he says is that you have to like think about the thing you want and or thing that you're trying to achieve and rewire your brain or reinforce all the positive associations with that thing, so that when you think of what you're working towards, you only think, oh wow, I'll be so happy once I get this thing. And then you have to just put all your negative associations with not getting that. So instead of being like, instead of having an awareness of this sort of like ambiguous nature of the situation and what you're striving for, you just have to have this really simple black and white thing where if I get the thing I want, it's good. If I don't, it's bad. And you can't let any nuance or subtlety into the situation at all, or it will be like sabotaging your well-oiled machine, basically, right? And this is basically, I think you can see this sort of Tony Robbins attitude in the king in this story, in that if his daughter is getting married, either the king wants it to be either a unambiguously good thing or an unambiguously bad thing, because then he can do his duty and either be a protector or, you know, offer up his daughter to be married and they live happily ever after. But the whole thing about it is that there's an uncomfortable sort of ambiguity that the daughter is basically processing, right? That the daughter has been like, is probably thinking, I've been sleeping with this guy. I don't know if I should commit. I don't know if I should get married. I don't know if I do this, if I'll run away with this guy, I'll never see my father again, all this kind of stuff. And for her, it's a uncertain, ambiguous situation. And that the king doesn't know, he just doesn't like the vibe of it. He's like, all I can tell is my daughter is ruminated. She's ruminating. She's worrying. She's stressed out. She's creating bad vibes. And like, look, marry the guy or don't. Just stop doing this. Like, oh, I'm forlorn. I'm looking out the window. I'm sad. Oh, you know, like. But this as a person. This is what astrology I find helps, because you may. The native of a chart that is very water heavy may find themselves in periods of their life where they feel very consumed by these kinds of processes, which if they're surrounded by a bunch of other people who may not have so many water signs, they may just, you'd be like, what a bunch, you know, so if somebody who might be very earth heavy or fire heavy or air heavy may look at the water sign individual and be like, why are you whinging and crying and ruminating? Like, if you have a relationship or you have some opportunity, you should be happy. Just go and do your thing and be happy. Why are you so upset? What you're right? So it's like, this is kind of like this yang thing about like, there's a certain kind of like, the yang energy wants things to be very simple, like it's good or it's bad. You do the thing, you don't do the thing. Don't just fuck around crying and so it's like, so we're gonna, okay, well, I'll meet the guy, I'll decide if I like him or not, and I don't have any room to be in the gray area, in the middle, in between. It's either we're gonna kill the guy or I'm gonna fuck him myself. I like him so much, basically, right? Like it's like how extreme the polarity between like good, and this is like the Tony Robbins thing, is that you're you're supposed to condition yourself so you have no room for nuance, and everything that comes your way is either you love it or you hate it, and you don't spend a second too long worrying about it, right? And it's like, in this, it concludes that his daughter rides away on a white horse and the groom rides away on a gray horse. And so this is the thing, is that like this king, in some way, he's sees a potential for a really optimistic, happy ending where everybody gets what they want. The daughter gets to be married, and obviously he cares about his daughter. He wants his daughter to be happy, but he also doesn't really want to let his daughter go. So it's sort of like, well, here, look, like you can get married, and then you and your new husband I will give them my land, and then we'll all be like a happy family, and the guy looks like a good son, and it's like you don't there's nothing to work. But the thing is, it's like his own, like the whole thing is that the yonginess of the king is in a kind of denial of the reality of the yin that the daughter is in touch with, right? And this is kind of like, so to bring it back to why I feel like this is a good one for this new moon in Scorpio, is that if you look at this, first of all, we have a Mercury Cazimi, so there's a certain, like, there's this moment of perhaps an insight or a revelation, but it's also in opposition to Uranus. And you know, there's something about Uranus which stands for technological innovations and inventions, and that the thing about that is, even if new technologies or whatever aren't required, there's something about it where you have a dilemma, right? Like imagine like you have a dilemma where you're, should I do this or should I do that? The path forward isn't clear. Uranus could offer a kind of a breakthrough resolution to problem solve these dilemmas in a way that is legitimately optimistic, because rather than looking at your life as if it's like some thing that is just stubborn and resistant and life's never going to be what you want it to be, there's actually opportunities to work creatively with what's going on, or to problem solve things, to work, like it's a workable situation basically, right? It's not all hopeless. But the problem is that just because it's a workable situation, just because it's not a hopeless situation, doesn't mean that it is universally a positive thing. And there's some kind of like, the problem that I have about the New Age and Western esotericism and all this kind of stuff is that they seek to liberate people from suffering, right? In such a way that seems kind of like unrealistic, right? Like it's kitsch. Like, you know the word kitsch, they describe advertisements from the 1950s where everything's just peachy keen and happy, and it's sort of like it feels fake. There's some important thing that's missing from this, which is not fooling anybody, because everybody knows it's not this sunshine and happy. There's some problem that is going to be there regardless, and that perhaps reality isn't black and white. Perhaps it's a gray area, right? And there's something about this where I think it's also interesting to apply this to the whole like the yin the yin character of the daughter has a more of an appreciation for the subtlety of the gray area. That even if this thing, like the whole point, what I find interesting about this is that in my last video I was talking about this album, and I mentioned this idea of like it being like folk horror almost, right? And there's nothing really necessarily horrifying about this story, because, you know, I mean, maybe the daughter goes off and gets married and lives a relatively happy life, and there's nothing to worry about, right? It doesn't, but the thing is, it doesn't tell you they lived happily ever after. And actually, the whole point of it is that the image of the gray horse that the groom rides away on is like a signifier for this sort of ambiguity, right? That so often, I think, like, the thing about this whole thing about fairy tales is that in like something like Lord of the Rings, like you want to have it so that the orcs and the goblins and Sauron are unambiguously the bad guys, and then all the other protagonists are unambiguously the good guys. Maybe at some point in time they get tempted by the power of the ring, but it's pretty like black and white, you know what's going on. And there's some kind of desire to live in a very simple, black and white, easy to understand world where all the ambiguities we're freed from, right? And the point is that like if you, like, maybe you'd be more motivated to reach your goal. Like Tony Robbins, maybe we'd be more motivated for success and reaching our goals if we just believed that getting what we wanted would make us happy, and in a very pure and innocent and naive way. But as we mature and as we grow older, we can kind of see that okay, I could solve this problem, but where that leads me could be into an ambiguous gray area that isn't necessarily good or bad, and that maybe I am completely justified for holding back on that, or for ruminating on it, or by being consumed by the emotions around that. Or that the other kind of thing too is that even there's also this kind of issue with like trying too hard to be a people pleaser, right? Trying too hard to find a solution that makes everybody happy, right? And that there's this kind of thing that I find that there's something about this, about like the Uranus stands for whatever, revolutions and big disruptions and big changes and all this kind of stuff. And it's like the king starts off in a position where obviously, the king though is a prisoner of Spain, which is an interesting detail, because the king is obviously from the beginning in a compromised position, but still wants to do his best to make everything good, But there's a kind of disavowal or denial of the compromise, right? That there's some kind of thing where he sees his daughter in a state of being ruminating, being forlorn, being worried, being concerned, and that he thinks that he can, by using these polarized ideas of completely rejecting the person as a bad person, the groom, or by accepting him like in an over exaggerated way, that this really polarized way of viewing the world between good and evil and all this kind of stuff is what is going to solve the problem, right? But what it leaves, what I find the song is so brilliant, is that in the end of it, you kind of get the sense that the king was unable to empathize, sympathize, relate to the emotion his daughter was feeling, because you get married, you live a happy life, good thing, there's nothing to be sad about, right? Or if the guy is a dickhead, you don't have to marry him, you don't have to worry about it. Life is simple, be happy, don't worry about it, don't stress about things. This is like my relation, it reminds me a lot of my relationship with my parents. I went through, periods of my life where I was dealing with mental health crises, and I had a lot on my mind. I had a lot that I was upset about, but it's frustrating when your parental figures aren't able to really relate to what's bothering you, and instead they just want to problems. Or it's not even parental figures, but I was struggling with a roommate when I was having this mental health challenge too, and I found that they rather than being able to meet you where you're struggling, they want to approach it from the angle of the king, where it's where you're like, I see things in a very black and white way. You're struggling because you're in an area. Now, rather than me meeting you in your gray area, let me just beat you over the head with this black and white thing. Like, oh, do this, do that, problem solve, more sunshine, fresh air, get more exercise. And you're just like, fuck off. You're not dealing with the actual problem, right? And then so it's there's something about this where you're after the king has problem solved the whole thing and his daughter rides away on her horse with some, and you can see that the symbolism is that you in your we come from an abundance mentality here, not a scarcity. There's enough to go around for everyone. We can make an abundant situation where everybody's happy. It's all just sunshine and roses and positivity. And then you see your daughter on her white horse trotting away with the husband to be on his gray horse, and you offered them your land so you could be a big happy family, but he's taking your daughter away. The white horse represents that the daughter is actually a good influence, right? And you thought with your clever We're going to use Uranus and inventive problem solving. You don't have to live with the frustration of ambiguity. You can just say yes and no, and live your life. Do it. Go live the dream, and everybody will be happy. And then you suddenly realize that the burden that this daughter was like, I get the sense, right? They don't say, this is what makes the song beautiful and a brilliant song to me, is that the burden that the daughter had, that she was carrying this burden. And then with that situation resolved, well, there's no ambiguity anymore. It's already played out. Now the king suddenly has the burden of like, wait a minute, what if this marriage isn't black and white as a good thing or a bad thing? What if there is what if I don't have a guarantee that my daughter is going to be happy or that we made the right decision? What if my plan that everybody would be happy and it'd be a happy family and they'd come to see me, what if I never see my daughter again? And what if the guy's actually a jerk? And what if I made the wrong decision? And what if I don't have the authority to make these, this is good, that's bad, listen to me, I'm the big dad who gets who saves everything and makes everybody happy. What if I did a bad job? What if I didn't make the right decision? What if I can't go back to change, And then it's like all of the uncertainty that his daughter was dealing with, now the king deals with. And then it's also like, and it's like because you were too impatient to find a resolution, you just gave away your daughter, perhaps the best thing in your life, you just let it go, right? And now you have to come up with a happy story to make that positive. That's precisely what the song isn't giving you. This song is like, you want a fairy tale world to make life easier for you, but that's precisely not the world we're living in. And the more you try to make the world match that, the world is going to resist, right? Now, Carl Jung said that God shows up basically not like, if we lived in a world where everything happened the way we wanted it to, everything that turned out in your life was in accordance to what your desires were, what your wishes were, you would feel like omnipresent. You would feel like you were a master of creating your own life. And the thing about this is Carl Jung said that when we encounter obstacles or challenges, or maybe you think you want something, but then there's a sort of uncertainty or ambiguity that says, do I really want that? Or that what you think would be the good way to live life, there's some obstacle that's preventing you from taking that path. Carl Jung, who also happened to be a Mars in Sagittarius native, but I don't know if that makes any difference with this, but Carl Jung said that for him, God showed up in people's lives precisely when life was not giving you what you wanted, right? And there's kind of some weird irony there, because I feel that there's a certain style of like people who pray. They pray to God for things that they want, right? Obviously people don't want certain things to happen. They want good things to happen, not bad things to happen. But they're all like, there's a certain act of prayer, which is like your attachment to things turning out a certain way or getting what you want or all this kind of thing. But for Carl Jung, that God represented this sort of stubbornness for that reality is not what you want it to be, right? That perhaps reality is more complicated than this simple binary where it's like some things are good, some things are bad. When I achieve my goal, I'll be happy, we'll live happily ever after. The fact that we would wish if it were that way, but there is some stubbornness that the world is not just going to be what you want it to be. And in that there's this kind of sense of the will of God. If everything that happens is the will of God, then the will of God is precisely shows up when our personal will is thwarted, frustrated, or that we run into a certain ambiguity where we don't even know if we want what we want. We don't even know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, right? And this is basically there's a certain kind of emotional thing with I don't even like at some I kind of a basic level I kind of had this experience of listening to this song and just like experiencing it from like the sound, the aesthetic, the mood, and then an emotional reaction to this of like it's a sort of a tragedy of like having the best intentions and only wanting to make people happy, but that attitude that's only good intentions has some inability to grasp the ambiguities of life, and that there's some kind of like, what if the transformation is that you lose that way of looking at things, and then you become burdened, like your daughter gets to go off, and you don't have to deal with your daughter ruminating anymore, but now you are ruminating. Did I just mess up my whole situation, right? But there's no going back, and this is like Uranus liberates, right? But the thing, what if liberating is like that, a liberation into ambiguity, where you don't know, you've been liberated from what you had before, that you knew you loved your daughter and you knew that you had a good family connection or whatever, and then you've been liberated from, she's getting married and you don't have that security with you that she's making the right decision, that you don't have the security that you made the right decision, you don't have the security that everything is going to turn out for the best, right? That you've been liberated from something. But what if what you've been what if you've been liberated from has been your own strategy to sort things into this convenient, like, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, I say yes to this, I say yes to no. What if you've been liberated from that, and then what you're left with is something much more confusing, right? And this is sort of like, when I listen to people talk, if you go back into politics, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about politics, but I tried listening to the Joe Rogan, Elon Musk interview, and I noticed that the way that Elon Musk talks about the woke mind virus as a kind of nihilism is like that, maybe this is because this is a folk, what year was this from? This is from 1972, right? This is from the height of the hippie movement, the height of, this sort of like, folk psychedelic postmodernism, where instead of people living with, instead of relying on the good principles of good and evil and right and wrong and do this and don't do this, they are embracing the cruel ambiguity where when your daughter gets married, you don't actually know if she made the right decision. You don't actually know if you made the right decision. You don't know if she's going to be happily ever after or not. And it's like, what's brilliant about this is it's a kind of a fairy tale about not being in a fairy tale. It's about how real life does not match this simple fairy tale good and evil world, and that as a result, we each bear that contradiction between right and wrong, good and evil internally, through our own responsibility to make moral choices, and that it's like it sort of almost becomes offensive to call that ruminating with negative emotions, right? Or I have to also admit, I did spend a certain period of time in a Gurdjieff group, fourth way group, or it was like learning about that stuff. And one of the things I didn't like about it was the attitude around negative emotions, because basically they basically see it as like you have certain productive capacities in your life, and that the more time you spend like ruminating or worrying or going around your head or like being like, am I making the right decision? You're creating an entity of negative emotion that you're feeding with drama and worry and they're like, we don't want you to waste all your time staring out the window, crying, worrying about your life. We want you to just, like, it's either good or it's bad, and you either get with the guy, you don't like the guy, you get married, you go off, you do the thing, you don't spend all this time ruminating about it, right? And they think that this is gonna, if everybody just does this, we will transform society into a new age utopian paradise. But precisely because it's absurd to me, because it's like you are turning basically people into like unthinking robots who have no capacity to approach the more subtle ambiguities of life, and everything is just like the most dumb fuck, paint a big happy smiley face and don't worry about anything, and mean like as a paper thin mask, when obviously that's not making you happy, right? Like, at least, so for me, there's some kind of like value in actually accepting the emotional ambiguities of life on their own terms, and accepting that maybe it's actually warranted to care about things, that we don't live in such a simple black and white world, and that maybe people have the right to ruminate and worry and care too much about things and be, it's not like you're not being a depressive narcissist, because it's your fucking life. If you have every right to worry about whether or not you're making the right choices, and don't trust somebody who's going to give you a simple answer that's going to be like, oh, you don't have to worry anymore because we're just going to take away all doubt and make everything either yes or no in the most dumb way possible. So that is like, this is what I would like my viewers to keep in mind for this new moon in Scorpio in an opposition to Uranus, that there's always, life is always workable. There's always potentials to come up with solutions, problem solving, but there's only so much you can problem solve for. And there's basically the archetypes are these forms that exist that can't just be, you can't problem solve the archetype out of reality, basically, right? I think that's what astrology helps with, is that we need to know our role as mortal human beings, that there's only so much we can do with life, and that there are certain archetypes which be as heroic and as positive as we may be. Eventually the hero must die when he meets the insurmountable obstacle that makes life and reality infinitely more mysterious and ambiguous than we will ever be able to grasp. And if you are disturbed by this, because it sounds like moral relativism, the point is that you're not going to get any comforting out of this video. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to sit with that one. You're gonna have to deal with the uncomfortable, ambiguous realities of life, and you don't expect me to play on the goddamn Tony Robbins team. Okay, thank you very much.